Bernays talks about the function of the PR as a special pleader. He likens the PR counsel to a lawyer, probably why he chooses to use the word counsel instead of agent. The perspective of defense is intentional, but PR is more like the prosecution. The hairnet company might be spun to be defending their profits, but a prosecution can be argued to be defending the law and the society. So they both can be spun to be defense. But just because the word defense is used does not mean that they are not the antagonists. So I'm in no way trying to minimize the utility and value of uncorrupted prosecution attorneys in our society, but they can be reframed to be defense of the law and society. Both prosecution lawyers and the hairnet company are on the offense. Again, you could spin it that the criminals are on the offense, and right, but it's ironic that offense and defense are, it's ironic that offense and offense are spelled the same. You're on the offense, and you made an offense. They're spelled the same, right? It's the same word, just pronounced different, right? So the hairnet company targeting unsuspecting women who did not know they were ever targets of a complex, calculated, and well-funded attack campaign, right? Is that a conspiracy, right? Conspiracy means a crafty, secret plan, a plan of action, which may or may not be illegal. So you could have a conspiracy that is legal, but usually, the natural interpretation is that it's an illegal conspiracy, right? So in a courtroom, both sides have well-trained legal counsel using the courtroom model. They're both highly trained lawyers. And if PR are the counsel for the hairnet company, who are the counsel for the unsuspecting women? So the judge's chair and the jury are empty in Bernays' model for this example. But are they really? We find out later in the book that Bernays claims PR is also the judge and the jury. So we have a model of PR from Edward Bernays that using the court model where PR are the judge, jury, and prosecution, and there is no defense counsel for the women being attacked. This is the fairness of Bernays' world of his model of what PR is, using his words, right? They are the attorneys, and they are also the judge, and they are also the jury, and yet there is no lawyers or counsel for those being attacked who may not even know, most likely don't know that they're being attacked. So it's a triad of goons attacking a naive target in the shadows of secrecy, and that is not how the court works, Eddie. Right? Maybe he has a really distorted perception of how courts work. Maybe I have a distorted perception. Maybe that is how the court actually works in our world, and I'm naive to believe that we do have, well-trained defense lawyers. But his model to make PR sound good, right, that this is the best model he could come up with, or the one he chose to, right? Presumably the best one he could come up with. So it's repulsive how Bernays claims the cure for cancer is knowledge via public relations, but he is correct that knowledge is a great tool. But in our case, for defense against PR campaigns and their manipulation. So Bernays has, as PR would, he has spun the concept 180 degrees. Now, we see this all the time, right? The attackers need defense in this world, and the targets don't need any, right? If one was writing a book on hunting, the author would not consider the defense of the prey being hunted by beasts beyond those defenses being obstacles to overcome, right? So this is a spookily apt metaphor for PR, the hunted and the hunters, the PR and their prey. Bernays claims the clients need PR counsel to defend them from the free will, the free thought, and the organic opinions of the public. Hairnet companies need to protect themselves from women choosing the wrong haircut. Subways and train companies need protection from the public's complaints against their shit service. Reframing on steroids. Spin without the target thinking the concept of spin or reframing. One interpretation, even though it's wrong, is all the uncritical thinker needs. So it is well within the interests of the manipulator to keep the public from questioning or even thinking about questioning. The idea of the public or targets realizing that there may be other interpretations is an anathema to the manipulator class. An epiphany of the public is the dread of the sophist. Probably why so few people know the meaning of propaganda and all the channels that participate in it, as well as the concepts of manipulation that are used, like reframing and all the logical fallacies and sophistry that are employed. I remember when I was in college talking to some older classmates, and they had no idea what propaganda even was. They're like, what's propaganda? Really? Anyways, they are not alone, obviously. It's funny how a word pops up and sticks in your head, like propaganda or sophistry. Now, I notice I'm using the word sophistry a lot here. It's an elaborate and shifty argumentation, right? It's sophistry. It's related to sophisticated, sophist, right? When you think about some of the logical fallacies, you can't help but notice them in conversations. It's almost daily. And recently I've had a guy appeal to the name of an author as a fallacious appeal to defend his point. The name of the author is irrelevant. The only potential value would be if the author's arguments were cogent. Now, it's not a given that just because they're a famous person that their arguments are accurate, right? Even if they're cogent, even if they're convincing, it doesn't mean they're true. And it doesn't take much to convince people these days, right? So we're looking for valid evidence, but in most cases, famous names or quotes are simply assertions without evidence. The weight or prestige of their name has no power to the critical thinker. Right? Simply appealing to what you have read or what someone wrote is not sufficient to prove anything. We all might quote someone, to trigger as a trigger to ponder, but it's not proof of anything. It's just because somebody happened to, people say, oh, great minds. Well, yeah, there's a lot of people that are smarter about a lot of other things, but just because some famous person wrote something doesn't mean then even if they're not famous, even if it's just what they wrote was famous, does not mean it's true. And same goes with appeals to education. Just because I took a course in astronomy doesn't mean whatever I claim about astronomy is true, right? It's a fantastic lesson on critical thinking was an unintended effect from a book I once read as a kid. And it was a book of quotes all jammed together ad hoc. Now, I mean, when you get all these famous quotes, it's hard to categorize them. They try to, but, a lot of them were diametrically opposed ideas, even if they're on a similar subject. So this made this book very enlightening, right? Maybe that was their intention. I don't think so, but because it was just some cheap book of quotes, right? Could have been. Maybe just because it's cheap doesn't mean they weren't intelligent people who organized it. But they were these quotes were like diametrically opposed to each other. Like there'd be a group sort of agreeing, and then there'd be a group that it's like the exact opposite. And it was enlightening to see quotes by famous people that all seemed like the gospel truth when they were isolated. When you hear that one single quote by itself, you're like, that is such a truth. There's no way that could be wrong. But then when you read the next one, it feels exactly the same, but it disagreed 100% with the one you just read. So you start realizing, well, hold on, there's something going on more here, right? Maybe assertions that sound good and plausible are not, right? They're not fact, right? So then you start thinking, well, maybe there's something more to this. Maybe we should be a little more critical about what we believe, right? So especially it's really good when you read these and you see they all disagree. Not they don't all disagree, but there's a bulk that disagree with each other as a collection. So there was no cohesive narrative or moral to the book. And, it was not a story. It was just a bunch of quotes, period. And I don't think it was ever meant to be read as a book. So this is what makes me think that they didn't really organize it like that specifically for what I got out of it. It was more of a reference as the publisher tried to frame it into sections. But it was a weak attempt, right? So it was just somebody probably had all these public domain quotes from famous people that have been dead for longer than 50 years or whatever. And they just put them together in a collection and published it, tried to make money off something that, they didn't even write. So I think they're like the what do you call it? The Krusty Crown, the Krusty the Clown of publishing houses, right? The benefit of the publisher didn't see, I'm assuming, was the lesson in critical thinking that it gave. Now maybe they did, but it was just the juxtaposition, the comparison side by side, which slapped me in the face and forced my little brain to realize quotes are not facts, and famous people are not any smarter than the average bear. Not to say that they can't be. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of people who are super smart and a lot of famous people that are really stupid. Especially when you hear it today, when we hear how the actors, having a voice on social media, you realize, holy cow, these people are stupid, right? And it's obvious if you think about it, right? But it took most of that book, me reading through that book. I would see the contradictory the comments, and then then I'd sort of go back to my old ways, right? Then I'd see another one. And it took pretty much the entire book of repetition of these contradictory quotes to start setting into my brain that maybe these people just don't know what they're talking about, right? Many contradictory quotes, took a while for me to get a grip on this cognitive disharmony, that the official sounding postulate can be false, and by famous people no less. And so it was a 2-4. So I realized famous people maybe don't know what they're talking about, and really good sounding quotes, assertions may not be true. So I was taught that lesson, I think, by chance, by reading that as a book, as a narrative, as a single narrative. But all these years later, I still catch myself falling for assertions and baseless platitudes. I wonder how many I still miss, just because people say stuff, and if you're not on the ball, it's easy to say, oh yeah, that makes sense, and then you move on. You don't slow down and think about, hold on a sec, wait, let's take a beat, right? It's so easy not to take a beat and just assume that these platitudes are true. So they can be wrong, and so can famous people, as can experts, especially experts. What's the word? Assigned. Remember, are they assigned experts? Designated as experts by journalists. Right? Journalists, of course, are bullshit. So the fact that they assign someone as an expert, the whole chain of it's compromised. Right? So. Especially they have experts who are outside of their field, but even within their field, as we've seen with the doctors making medical truths about more bacon, and in more modern times, the same kind of thing still happening. And presumably these doctors are experts in their field, and they still come up with these blatant bullshit conclusions, which they should absolutely know better, and they probably do. And that's what makes me think that they've got to be corrupted. So humans can manage pretty well and get through life without being critical thinkers. Obviously, we see a lot of people who've retired that are absolute fucking morons, right? So, though our opinions probably won't be our own if we're not critical thinkers, and like pets or workhorses of some unknown master who hires perception management counsel to train us to pull the plow and defend our cognitive masters' opinions with great emotional vigor, right? Because that's what happens. When people have been conditioned, it's not that they just say, I think it's probably that. It's usually they're very emotional, and they start calling you names and everything. It's like, hold on, man, why are you so emotionally attached to this one interpretation of these facts or presumed facts? They may not even be facts. It could be bullshit facts, right? But not even the if you remember the Star Trek Next Generation and their Borg, not even the Borg drone is an equivalent example, as they are part of the collective. They at least still have their original mind somewhere in the noise. This is assassination of the mind and replacing it with an artificial mind fabricated by some jackass with big money. So I'm not sure one can defend a conditioned opinion without great emotional vigor, as, a conditioned opinion without great emotional vigor. As an anecdote, so you think back to somebody who argues with you about something, and, a lot of people get heated and then they start getting emotional about things, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're wrong, but it's almost always when someone, you sense it, you get this feeling, whoa, what's this? They're not listening to reason or fact. They have these shutters behind their eyes, as Roger Waters once said about talking to people like this, that you could see the shutters, or you could sense, ka-chung, the big shutters closing behind their eyeballs, and they're not listening. Right? They're on automatic mode. So cognitive masters of perception management, and their uncritical, exploitable slaves. Right? Truly cognitive slaves, as those manipulated targets are not paid. Right? They're not paid for their defending of their master's opinions. In fact, it's the opposite. The cognitive slaves are paying for their cognitive masters with behavior, by buying and doing and saying and thinking what they are manipulated to. Like, it's way worse than slavery. Perception management establishment and their cognitive slaves. They aren't targets. They are slaves. They're worse than slaves. Slaves are at least aware that they're slaves. Cognitive slaves are so broken that they're willing to defend their manipulators. Now, I mean, in real life, perhaps there were actual slaves who defended they were broken as well, and they defended their masters. But I mean, that's like a hardcore Stockholm syndrome kind of thing going on. But military training, I'm sure many people have been through military training. I was top recruit, basic training. It isn't too different. One is conditioned to do and not question. My old government job had a lot of former military, and, surprise, surprise, right? Cognitive slavery is 2 orders of magnitude worse than just physical slavery. Enslaving not just one's thoughts, but the entire mode of thinking, how they reason, how they rationalize things, how they come up. It's not just that their conclusions are wrong. It's how they came about those conclusions was a wrong path, right? It was irrational. So control the nose ring and you control the beast. Even literal beasts of burden are only conditioned to do what they are told, not what to think, and worse, the mode of thought they employ, right? We don't train our dogs to think a certain way. We just train them to do what they're told, right? So even they aren't as manipulated as humans, right, by public relations. So, religions and monarchies have been mind fucking the people for centuries. So who is defending against it? If left to the individual, we are each fighting a vast machine of evil. We are each a Chinese holding his bag of groceries and a briefcase in front of a line of tanks, as that famous image in Tiananmen Square. Though that was a protest of thousands against the brutal Chinese regime. The death count is somewhere around 10,000 people, according to the BBC. The Communist Party open-fired indiscriminately into the crowd of thousands. That is collectivist communism. The only time that happens today, and it was recently, it was a year ago, this guy was, I think he was just charged recently. He was an Antifa guy somewhere in the United States. I think it was probably Oregon. And there was a protest, and he was indiscriminately shooting into a crowd of people who he disagreed with. Now, that is CCP tactics that the Antifa are using. And thankfully, the police got the guy, and thankfully they arrested him and charged him. But the attorney general, in Oregon and a lot of these states are just total scumbags that these are Antifa, we'll let them walk. It's disgusting. There's no justice. Anyways, so it's important to note the army is not the Chinese army in China. They are the army of the Communist Party. It's a political party's army, not an army of the nation. That is a lot of things people don't consider, right? Maybe it's not a big deal, but that's pretty scary when you think about that. It's a partisan army, not an army of the nation. This seems to be what's going on today in the West, where they're filtering the military people. So PR are like real estate agents or, used car salesmen. Their goal is to close a deal, not do what's best for their target. It's hunters and prey. Now, lawyers have an obligation to do what's best for their client. They have a legal obligation to do what's best for their client. Realtors and salesmen and other manipulators do not. PR, they don't have a legal. Now, I wonder if they do have a legal. It depends on the contract they sign with their client. They might have a legal representation to do what's best for their client. But then what's best for their client may be subjective, right? So is it about making money? Maybe if they get away with things, was it the result? Is the ends that justify the means, Anyways, doctors, I think, are supposed to also have a legal obligation to do what's best for the patient, but this doesn't seem to be what's going on today. Who knows anymore with regulatory capture. Regulatory capture seems to be getting worse. There's this guy, Jordan Peterson, today, who's being threatened by his regulatory agency, the Psychologists College or whatever they're called, of Ontario, and because he reposted the leader of the opposition's tweet or message about something, and it was innocuous, just a political thing. He didn't agree with the prime minister, and Jordan Peterson also tweeted independently that he disagreed politically with what the prime minister of this nation has done or said. I don't know the details of it other beyond that, and so the college is obviously a compromised. It's captured by the partisans of the whatever I don't know how you want to frame them. It's amorphous. The globalist, whatever Trudeau and his scumbags, same as the United States, the Democrats, they answer to the same globalist World Economic Forum type garbage. And if the regulatory body obviously is compromised to that, then they are threatening. Now it's overtly people like Jordan Peterson. So I wonder what happened to doctors if during the pandemic, if they were told, do not, give any treatment beyond the vaccine, right? Do not even tell them about vitamin D or C or taking vitamins and lots of sleep and zinc and, all these other things, or, ivermectin. Oh God, horse paste, despite it winning all those, Nobel Prizes and saving millions of lives and being on the World Health Organization's essential medicines and being, before the fucking pandemic, it was noted as being as safe as fucking aspirin. And now all of a sudden it's, as the, was it DARPA that up until 2018, I think, did a study on coronaviruses, and they found that ivermectin was the first the treatment that you give immediately for coronaviruses if there was a pandemic. And all of a sudden, so they knew about this before the pandemic, and all of a sudden, no, it's horse paste now. What the fuck? It is scary, the shit that's going on. Right? Anyways, sidebar, but not only, getting back to PR, not only does PR apparently not care if the narrative for their client is good for the public or not, as you will hear later, they are sadistic sociopaths that actually want things. He mentioned, I got to be careful how they say this, because Edward Bernays says this, and so I think I quote it later on, but they actually want things to be bad for others, to expend energy, to go out of their way to make things worse for others with no benefit to the antagonist. Like, it is insane, some of the stuff. And you think, well, why would they do that? That doesn't make sense. It's costing them energy, resources, and time, right? Well, I guess that's redundant, because resources means energy, cash and time, right? So anyways, slave does sound hyperbolic when in fact slave is not a strong enough concept for, as I mentioned earlier. And what remains of the target's free will has been completely destroyed, and at least on that one specific topic. And it is funny how brains appear to be working this way. It's topic based. It's not your entire ideology. You could do it on very specific subjects. And for example, Donald Trump. You say the word, right? People respond to that. They're not talking about generally Republicans or whatever other classes he may be in. Billionaires or possibly crooked property management, whatever the fuck I don't know how he got his money. In New York property barons. I don't know what exactly the guy did. Anyway, it doesn't matter. The point being that we respond on a specific topic. Now there's a lot of other people that you might have heard of, like say Bloomberg. Right now you may not respond to that about that guy, even though he's probably most likely even more crooked than Trump ever was. Right? Not saying that either of these guys are, but it's just most likely, if on the scale of corruption, which one would be worse. Right. And what are we if we are not our beliefs and our free will? And so if our free will is being attacked, and that is what they're removing, they are stealing it. That mystical part of us, our id, our soul, whatever you call it, it's been stolen or killed, destroyed, replaced with a host of holy horrors to direct our aimless dance. That's a line from Neil Peart, one of the Rush songs. Can't remember what it is. Replaced with a host of holy horrors to direct our aimless dance. I can't remember what song that's from. A planet of playthings we dance on a string, of powers of we cannot perceive. Well, it's free will. That's it. The song's from Free Will. So our free will, oddly enough, right? Our free will is not so much stolen as killed or destroyed and completely erased. Right? This could be a reason why any discussion on consciousness, psyche, spirit, anima, pneuma, whatever you want to call it, are considered woo-woo by the establishment. They don't want targets to realize their souls, for lack of a better word, are being destroyed and replaced with a foreign wairua. They could also be why there is such vehement opposition to all aspects of religion by leftists. It's easier to destroy someone's soul if they don't believe they have one. This also jibes with nihilism and collectivism and all the other evils. Right? I choose free will. Right? I say let the people's individual, true, organic thinking processes and opinions happen based on truth, objective truth, as close as we can get. Though one could argue that this is what's happening on a larger scale. Right? The manipulators are enacting their evil as per their genetic programming, their free will. So at what, does your free will end before your fist hits my nose? At what point, can you move around and so long as you don't hit me, right? One could retort that we are also genetically programmed to be predators and savages, and we don't allow manhunting and murder on the streets, as that's all our civilizations on this planet pretty much have evolved to, right? So outside of, private islands, where the 1% can molest girls and manhunt captured vagrants and dissidents with impunity, which were conspiracy theories, right? What was that? The Nexium cult was a conspiracy theory until all of a sudden there's overwhelming evidence, and nobody ever called it a conspiracy theory. And Epstein's Island, right? Oh, that's a conspiracy theory. The 1% elite aren't doing that kind of stuff, and turns out they did. And they arrested. Well, they killed Epstein, and they convicted what's her face, but not one John. Did the FBI have a list of all the Johns? Who are all these wealthy bastards that were on the island, right? All we hear about is that one royal, was the Queen's brother or whatever. But we don't, well, Bill Gates and Bill Clinton. But these are the only, I don't know why those guys' names are allowed to be leaked. I guess it was whatever reason. But all the other rich assholes. And it's not just rich assholes, it's specific ones that went to that island. Like, who are these people, right? I want the list. These people should be held accountable. If Epstein was held accountable, the Johns are just as responsible. They're the ones that were doing the deeds and paying for it. So who paid for it and who did it? I think those people are more responsible than the Johns who supplied the service. Or not the Johns, the Epsteins who supplied the service for the Johns. Anyways, so leave out the fiction. Epstein's Island was real. And are there manhunts? Well, let's ask the Clintons. Perhaps they don't need to go to islands to Clinton people to suicide them. Perhaps it's my genetics or my conditioning, whatever the reason. I feel this cognitive assassination is detrimental to whatever our true organic purpose is as a species. So let the women bob cut their hair if they want, and let's forget what the control freaks want and their PR, right? But this artificial system of big money controlling things is, it's like a monopoly. Now, I'm not against capitalism. I'm totally for capitalism, but what I'm against is monopolies. And I've heard people talking on the radio saying how monopoly is a instructional or a warning against capitalism. It's not a warning against capitalism. It's a warning against monopoly, right? Centralized control. It's a warning against centralized control is what it is. So how do the sadists justify the energy to control others? To disconnect the target's organic pneuma. Erase what psyche is left in the corpse, and then saturate the remaining mental tissue with the client's excreta. Money and power, right? Drones. Targets are transmogrified. Anybody who's read Calvin and Hobbes, that's the only place I've ever seen that word, right? But the targets are transmogrified from humans into Wyruic drones. So controlling the people at this level is clearly a greater power than just money. There is no moral justification. And if people were aware of what side they are actually defending, I think things would get very difficult for the manipulator class. So this topic is very a very important subject, one of the most, possibly the most, yet it is ignored by our society at large, and makes me feel like an old coot, that big ass white beard, an old coot standing on a mountain, yelling at the sky. So if people are exposed to it cogently, and they still choose to ignore it, then I suppose they are entitled to their losses. Some people have a difficult enough time trying to get by in life, and leave all the pondering to others, right? And that's understandable. If you've been oppressed to the point where you have to work and you don't have any free time to think, that's one of the tools of manipulation. So perhaps I should start a cult to condition people to not be conditioned into cults. Of course, I would use the Orwellian term, as in the opposite, the anti-cult, as the name for my cult, the cult of free will. I wouldn't be surprised if Marxists or woke bigots haven't already used the term cult of free will, the collectivist scum that they are. So PR is clearly not analogous to a defense lawyer. Bernays also refers to the court of public opinion. This court has only one lobbyist, one advocate, and that is forever who is behind the big money paying for it. In the court of public opinion, PR give the best argument for their clients with no one giving the counter argument. So do unsuspecting people deserve to be manipulated because they don't know better? Does the hunter think the rabbit deserves to be shot because he doesn't know better? These are incongruent questions. I'm not crapping on hunters. We all eat. I'm comparing those two questions to show how it appears Bernays is viewing his targets. They are simply prey. There is a hint of degradation by Bernays towards his targets. He defines mob psychology as the intolerance of human society for a dissenting point of view. He's using human society, which employs everyone, as in his definition of mob psychology. There is no proof that there even is mobs or mob psychology. You know, you can have crowds of people, but they are all individuals. They all might agree on something, but there's no this, what do you call it, Gustavian crowd type mob psychology where it takes over people's. It's in my earlier podcast on Gustave Le Bon, if you don't know what I'm talking about. But so if it does exist, it is certainly not all of human society. Otherwise, we wouldn't call it mob psychology. We would just call it psychology. If it affects everybody, right? The definition of a mob is a large crowd, though elitists sometimes refer to the common man, the populace, someone without title as the mob. I'm sure it's not meant as a term of endearment and is derogatory. That Bernays is using it indicates his target audience is the elites and not the common man. While intolerance for a dissenting point of view is a thing, it's not called mob psychology, it's called bigotry. So Bernays is claiming everyone in human society is a bigot, which is a pretty hefty stereotype, but I think he believes it. He claims the mob psychology has made it difficult and often dangerous for a man to plead a new or unpopular cause. So Bernays is talking about when the target realizes that they're being sold shit stew, and it's not being done clandestinely behind 5 layers of deception, or they're unaware of it. So this may also be written with his future clients in mind, as this book is apparently meant to sell the need of PR to the elite. So Bernays may be using his PR shtick on the reader to reframe the mob psychology concept as a dog whistle to his reader, that PR can use mob psychology as a weapon against the dissenting point of view. Now, he's using dissenting point of view as, those of us who, the rational person realizes that because somebody has a dissenting point of view, that's not a bad thing. And generally, a dissenting point of view is a good thing, right? You want to go against dogma of the authority, right? So if you have a dissenting point of view, these are the important views. What's wrong with it? These are the people that notice something is wrong. So it's very important to hear dissenting points of view. But here, Bernays is stealing the concept of the dissenting point of view. He's the authoritarian who is trying to brainwash the public, and yet he's spun it to the point of they're the dissenting point of view. They're the rebels fighting against the machine, right? The machine being the people, right? So the people, it's spooky how these PR people can spin things 180 degrees. So if the big money wants to enforce a new or a different ideology, truth be damned, this is what their view is that you should have, and if you dare speak up against it, they're the dissidents. You're the authority that they're trying to show you the truth, right? It's such bullshit. But PR can use mob psychology both to push their client's narrative, and it can be used as an excuse for the voices of dissent, even if their voices are calling for something alien to PR, which is the truth. Mob psychology for offense and defense. It's interesting. Like most people don't think these ways, right? You wouldn't think that they would think these ways, but here we're being exposed to it. So you start realizing, mob psychology as an offensive tool against the people. Right, so imagine the caustic rhetoric by the hairnet company or the hairnet PR team directed towards the innocent woman who argued that she wanted to bob cut her own hair. Right, you don't own your own body. We own your body and your mind, you slave. Don't cut your hair. That is our hair. We need you to buy our hairnets. Right. It's so. Anyways, Bernays writes. Napoleon expressed so nearly the spirit of the PR Council's work when he said, "Circumstance, I make circumstance." So Bernays writes that he gathered intel on the public mind from the facts of life articles in papers and magazines, ads, speeches from government, anecdotes from smoking rooms, gossip on Wall Street theater, and others like him. So that sounds pretty or super sketchy. He writes things like, first of all, there are circumstances and events PR can help create. Create. So circumstances are being created by PR. Now, this is flag should be going up here, right? Apparently, to push its narrative, PR uses movies, radio ads, news, speeches, parades, articles, whatever media is available, right? So Bernays rambles on about how difficult it is to achieve or maintain what a public mind is. I would agree. It's difficult, in fact, impossible, as there is no public mind, only a collection of desperate or disparate, separate, unique minds who don't all agree. Now, there are many modes of beyond movies and radio and ads. It could be even to the point of a store selling only certain things, right? Like a nostalgia store trying to only push a new narrative that only sells certain things. I don't want to go down that road too much because then it starts sounding really crazy, but and maybe it is. But if you go to some of these stores, you start looking, you're like, oh, that's pretty woke. That's pretty woke. Oh, that's pretty woke. Where's all the, nope, there's no, anyways. But Bernays thinks using the fallacy of stereotype, he explicitly says he uses the logic of stereotype. So, of course, he finds it difficult. And you'll see that he actually does use the logic of stereotype. He's an anti-critical thinker. So the fact there are disagreements and elections would suffice to prove to even an imbecile that there is no one collective, one public mind. People have different opinions. Right. People have different views. And the fact that he's trying to change their views, it's so self-evident, right, that there is no one public mind. So you may try to defend Bernays and put words in his mouth, but that is not what he is explicitly saying. And this is the thing with a lot of manipulation. People try to make sense, right? And that's where the manipulation comes in, because they're leaving dots for you to connect, which lead down the merry path of bullshit. And if you connect those dots, then it seems more plausible because you connected those dots. This is what he really means, right? So it's sort of like what I'm doing now, but I'm not following his dots. I'm challenging his dots. So with a heap of charity, we could interpret his actual meaning to be a critical mass of the public, right? A more sophisticated view would be for him to claim the various schools of thought or groups who share a certain view, keeping in mind the complexity of the individual, and anyone can have any view on anything. But Bernays demonstrates his idiotic logic of overgeneralization. He writes, "The lawyer can tell what arguments will appeal to the court. If that were true, no lawyer would ever lose his case, which is a logical absurdity given every case has a losing lawyer." So it's also why would Bernays say that in this book? Why would Bernays say that the lawyer can tell what argument will appeal to the court, right? The expert knows his subject, right? So what's he trying to say, right? He's clearly trying to beat his target audience on the need for the expert, the need for the lawyer in court. Well, he's trying to say that's the same reason why you need the need for PR, right? This is just him trying to sell PR to the reader. So you wouldn't go to court without a lawyer, or you shouldn't. And I've been creating this courtroom analogy for pages to try to dupe you of the necessity of PR. That's essentially what he's saying, right? And that's the best he could come up with. So Bernays continues along this line of manipulation. He says, "The salesman knows what points to stress to his buyers, and the politician what to emphasize to his audience." So there's a long tail of politicians who don't win and many salesmen who do not sell. So interpretation is the art of judgment. literal interpretation we see at face value, or a natural interpretation where we fill in the missing parts and make connections which may be false connections or phantom connections, right? This is the slippery slope where apophenia tries to come in, or they try to take advantage of apophenia, right? The manipulators. So we don't want to be making any large leaps of logic that weren't explicitly said, or we will give a false positive and believe the bullshit. Conversely, we don't want to ignore valid evidence, or we will be giving the false negative and calling something potentially true bullshit. So judgment strives for the type 1.5 apopheniac, the balanced judgment, the questioned reasoner, right? Do not jump to conclusions. Do not jump from point to point. Don't jump. No jumping. So we want to be a little bit meta. Why are we even talking about this in this context or arguing this point? Right? This is a good question to ask ourselves often. We definitely cannot allow natural interpretations of vague generalizations as proof of anything. But Bernays finishes this sales pitch of PR to the target audience of elites or elites, elitas. He makes them sound less dominant, right? With the ability to estimate group reactions on a large scale over a wide geographic and psychological area is a specialized ability. Yes, specialized because it is impossible. Bernays' logic is calling all of the colors of the rainbow a single color. It is a logical absurdity. Now, you could argue, yes, you could put all the colors together and make it white, but then you're not explaining or demonstrating or acknowledging all the separate colors that do exist, right? So they're all in there. But anyways, so yet he lets his freak flag fly and hangs it out in the open for all to see. And he's not embarrassed about it. He doesn't see anything wrong with it. Or like a con man, he's pretending that he doesn't see anything wrong with it. So he could frame a new term or refer to the rainbow as color, but that's not what he's selling. He's not selling the concept of opinion. He's selling the articulation of the specific colors, the specific opinions. He goes on to dig himself deeper. It's a specialized ability which must be developed with the same painstaking self-criticism and the same dependence on experience that are required for the development of the clinical sense and the doctor or surgeon. What a load of shit. First off, recent grads are shown to be more accurate in diagnosis of the more rare disease symptoms as it's still fresh in their minds, and they've been exposed to updated knowledge and revisions as medical sciences advances. Second, the association of PR with that of a clinical doctor is a blatant and pathetic attempt, of association, like a rooting a cheap magician, or there's an old-timey word for that, but I can't think of it right now. It's not cliche, obvious, boring, unimaginative, weak, anemic. I can't think of it, but you get the idea. It's blatant and pathetic to try to associate PR with that of a clinical doctor, and even then, his association is wrong. So I will. I can picture Wilma Flintstone saying droll, Fred, real droll, but she's being sarcastic, and I think droll actually means amusing, oddly or whimsical. It's comical. So crass, is it crass? I think crass is the word I was looking for. It's crude, unrefined, as to be lacking in discrimination and sensibility. Interesting how the word discrimination means both power to make fine distinctions, and it also means treatment based on a class or category rather than individual merit, which is the opposite, as treatment based on category is not making a distinction about an individual in a class or category ascribed to them. So wokeism is discrimination as it is treatment based on category, Wokeism is crass. It lacks the ability to make fine distinctions and capacity to respond intelligently to refined emotions. It is a blunt weapon of hate and division. Crass is a concept that feels like it's been suppressed from our society. Though crass is might be the word I was looking for, it doesn't really convey what I wanted to about Bernays' association of PR with a clinical doctor. My original description of blatant and pathetic, I think, is better, but I need to use the word crass more. So why does discrimination have an Orwellian anti-definition? What's up with that? Why does it have the opposite? Itself is the opposite definition of itself, right? There is in a certain interpretation. So there is some force that doesn't want us to have discriminating minds, perhaps, or maybe people just use it sarcastically, and that's how it came about, right? As an ability to make fine distinctions and the capacity to respond intelligently to refined emotions. It's like our model of concepts as buckets, right? The more sophisticated and knowledgeable we get, the smaller and more refined our buckets become. We discriminate between the nuances of our smaller buckets. To not be discrimination in that context would be to be coarse, less accurate, simplistic, overgeneralized, indiscriminate. So why does the woke ideology use the negative connotation of discrimination in action, and how is that not attacked by the majority of people? This indicates those who do not speak up are either knowledgeable and prevented from speaking up, or they are unknowledgeable and are useful idiots to the ideology, or indifferent perhaps. So that is, they are what they claim to fight, right? They are discriminating bigots who think in stereotypes. Also, given the trope of doctors being, the white coat, black art, and regulatory capture, is that really an association that Bernays wants to make? But it's not the stereotype, right? He's thinking in stereotype, and he's hoping the readers just think of doctors in the stereotypical view that, the white coat, the witch doctor, right? They're knowledgeable, they have the dark arts, right? Bernays writes that PR uses the same practical means of gauging the public mind that advertising uses. So, again, is there even a public mind? No, right? So, which he claims are, research campaigns, the symposium. I don't use the word symposium too often, but it means conferences. I think it can also mean magazines, a collection of writing, like a magazine. Though it can mean a party, right, with booze and music, right? The symposium, right? They got the intellectual discussions among the ancient Greeks where they got drunk and they had symposiums, or symposium. I think it was a singular when they had, well, it depends. I don't know. So PR also uses surveys on target groups or those of a particular state of mind. How Bernays would know what the state of mind someone has before he asks is unknown, right? They're going to use stereotype. They say, well, this person lives in the country, they're going to think this way, right? Like a lot of the partisans in politics, they judge people by where they live. Never mind other things, just your geography. You believe this because you live there, right? It's that crazy. So at least Bernays claims PR confirms or modifies their own appraisals and judgments. So he's saying they do take in feedback, which I don't think they really do, right? But especially with his examples, how they come up with an asserted truth, and then they use the doctors to and leading artists to do studies to confirm their asserted truths, right? So he quotes Charlie Rosebalt, who says, PR with proper training have a keen sense of the likes and dislikes of what we call the public. That is, the average man and woman. So who cares what Charlie Rosebalt asserts? just because he asserted it. So this, does this mean anything? What evidence is he using to make that claim? There's still no proof of a unified like or dislike of the public. He then goes full propaganda by claiming the compass is no more sensitive to direction nor mercury to temperature than is the expert to the influence of publicity upon the mind and emotions of the man in the street. This is in the classic for the non sequitur. It's a classic for the non sequitur logical fallacy, right? In this case, spew two examples of something perceived as accurate and true, and then immediately associate them with whatever bullshit you want to project. The clock is not more sensitive to time, nor the measuring stick to distance, than is this podcast to the dark arts of manipulation. That sounds good, right? But it's a non sequitur. How accurate a clock is or how accurate a measuring device is has no correlation to how accurate the podcast is or how accurate, the bullshit PR people are. It's a non sequitur. There is no correlation between the two, right? But it sounds good. Oh, yeah, wow. So one might claim he's just using flowery rhetoric, or metaphor. But that's moot. His point is still bullshit. It is just an assertion with zero evidence. You can smell the hard sell. Bernays is clearly trying to sell PR to his target audience, which happens to be the elites. He claims, broadly speaking, the importance of either making one's case accessible to the public mind or of determining whether that cause will impinge favorably or unfavorably have resulted in the need for PR. Whether the story will have an unfavorable effect for the client, not the targets, of course, right? It's all about the perspective from the client. Bernays quotes the douchebag Lippmann once again, who wrote, "The enormous discretion as to what facts and what impressions shall be reported is steadily convincing every organized group that whether it wishes to secure publicity or not, the discretion, the exercise of discretion cannot be left to the reporter. It is safer to hire a press agent who stands between the group and the newspapers." We can tentatively assume press agent here means PR, even though Bernays earlier argued that there's a distinction between the press man and the press agent and public relations and the ad man. He was trying to divide them up into more sophisticated buckets. But here, obviously, Lippmann is just conflating press agent with PR. Otherwise, why is he including this in a book about PR, right? So there must have been some negative impressions of PR back in the day, I assume, because people were pretty smart, right? Bernays fights it by reading this the line here. "It's clear that the popular impression of the scope and functions of the Council on PR must be radically revised if any accurate picture of the profession is to be looked for. The PR Council is the lineal descendant of the circus advance man and of the semi-journalist promoter of small part actresses." Right, so PR is the direct descendant of the carny grifter, the loudmouth before the circus comes to town. The guy walking down the street screaming and yelling, "Circus is coming!" So Bernays claims the economic conditions have changed the character of PR work, primarily to keep their clients from drifting into unfortunate or harmful situations, and how to keep positive results in PR. Not primarily to extricate them from difficulties into which they have drifted, or to bring the clients by chance to the public's attention. Why did he write that? It appears to convince his reader that not only do they need PR, in times of emergency, but not just to get them out of a crappy public perception event, right? But they should have PR not just on retainer, but have them on working all the time on everything, right? To keep them from drifting into the the shit show in the first place, right? Based on economic considerations, it's cheaper for you to have us on staff, right, than to slide in and have us to try to pull you out. That's right. So he's arguing it's cheaper to pay PR all the time instead of just when they are needed. So he's not just selling PR, he's trying to sell them to use PR all the time. So Bernays finishes this section with PR is a pleader to the public of a point of view. He molds the action of his clients as well as molds public opinion. Does PR plead to the public or mold their opinion? Which is it? So first they were pleading, now they're molding their opinion. So are they pleaders or are they molders, right? So he starts talking about the group and the herd, right? So I don't know if he's differentiating here between the group and the herd, but let's find out, right? With a title like that, we can expect a reframing of angry townsfolk protesting outside of a Monty Burns, from The Simpsons, his estate, because he turned down the electricity or turned it off, to a lot of assertions about the boogeyman mob that is charging up the hill with pitchforks and torches with cries of, burn the witch, the poor innocent client, poor Mr. Burns, right? Release the hounds, Smithers. So I've noticed once you understand the concept of a logical fallacy, you start to see it. And, it's being used by people who you would expect to know better, right? A common combination is anecdote, a case of one, which is then used as proof of some stereotype. So added to that, the anecdote is often suffering from cum hoc ergo propter hoc, the causation correlation fallacy. So the uncritical person usually stressing that it was actually observed, or worse, that someone else told them they observed it. So there's a reason why hearsay is not admissible and valid evidence in court, although I think the courts are weakening and starting to allow this shit, right? So the courts, along with every other standard based thing in this country, has degraded to the point that hearsay might be more admissible. I don't know. So regardless, if something was observed, it is a case of one, an anecdote, and it is insufficient to prove a stereotype. And we often don't know the actual cause of the event, which is often asserted with no evidence. And there's actually a lot of times when people just make, bogus. It's not even an anecdote. It's a likely if this happened, right? Well, that again. So now you're using a fairy tale to try to prove a stereotype, right? Which are both wrong, right? So a fairy tale is just a fabrication, and the stereotype it's wrong logic, right? Because it's not. It's just it's a sample size of too small, right, to prove anything. So you might think, hey, this podcast guy here is using hearsay. He's talking about what other people say or what people might say, what other people might create, right? So hearsay is unverified information from someone else. I give you the titles of the books that I'm talking about, and they are publicly available for everyone to read. It is verifiable. It is not rumor. It is not gossip. It is not something that I've created. I'm showing you. I'm explaining it. So it's not hearsay. So also, even if my examples were not real, even if it is a model of faulty thinking that is the important concept to grasp, also, even if an example is not real, it's the model of the faulty thinking that is the important concept to grasp. So even if it is just like a math problem, just a fabricated problem, it's the mode of thinking. It's that concept of that mode that you can watch out for. So it could be just a fabrication, right? But it's the actual mode. So Bernays, being the father of PR, does add quite a bit to the context of what we're saying, right? In this case, it's not just the faulty mode of reasoning, it's who is using the faulty mode and his explaining of how they are using it against us. The common mode or combination of fallacious arguments of anecdote To prove stereotype with unproven cause compounds their misconception. And this happens a lot with manipulation. It's just not just one fault or fallacy. It's like a whole shit sandwich, layers, strata of logical fallacies on top, compounding each other. So it is not just wrong, it is wrong in many ways. So it makes sense, right? If they're not using accurate reasoning, then they would, of course, use fallacious thinking at each mode or each node of reasoning, right? So when they come up to another spot where they have to make a decision or reason something, it's going to be wrong. And then that's going to lead to another one that's wrong. And then that's going to lead to another one that's wrong, right? If they are capable of valid reasoning, they might make a single mistake of reasoning at a node, right? Like everybody makes mistakes, but they would, if they were capable of reasoning, valid reasoning, they might still make a few mistakes, but at least, the general path would be a little more accurate, right? But most of their logic would, be sound. But these dorks who are exploitable targets themselves make faulty conclusions, and their error is compounded with each iteration of node of reasoning. Every conclusion is based on fallacious bullshit. It is clear that a faulty node of thinking is critical for the manipulator to succeed, right? Otherwise, they wouldn't need to manipulate you. If they're just explaining the truth, right, they could attack it many different ways, and you would still pretty much come up, we would hope, right? Although there's been a lot of times when people still argue against what is blatantly true. So it's like a boat. If you have a flaw, water will find its way in. If you have a flawed reasoning, error will find its way in. In a way, these monsters of manipulation are forcing us to get our shit together, just as the predator forces the prey to develop defenses that have effect. The ones that don't have effect get eaten. The ones that do have effect survive, right? So we need to step it up. A buddy told me a story of a friend of his that fits the common combination of fallacy. Apparently, his buddy could not get a job until he changed his first name on his resume. So this is hearsay, anecdote, causation, correlation, all fallacy, right? What proof is there that it was the name change that caused him to successfully get a job? And if there was systemic discrimination against his ethnicity, which is why presumably he needed to change his name, why would the company still hire him when they saw his face, when they met him in person? They would, boy, you can't fool him now. Oh, I got a different first name. I'm no longer that ethnicity, right? If you see the person, you would see that they were. So if there was systemic discrimination against that ethnicity, they wouldn't have hired him regardless of what his name was, right? Or they only hire certain ethnicities with Western names. Like the fact that they hired him refutes his narrative. Or is he claiming there's systemic racism only against the names? It's still not proven by his hearsay, his anecdote, and his causation correlation story. Perhaps the Toronto Star told him to think that way, because you hear a lot of stories in garbage mags like that, where they make all these bullshit fantasy stories and false correlations. And anyways, so is there an opportunity here for manipulators to capitalize on uncritical thought? Most people, I would think, who get things wrong are honestly misinterpreting things, and we all get things wrong at times. The danger is that they believe their misinterpretation. They think in absolutes, black and white, and have zero critical spirit. So the idea that they may be wrong is often too alien for them to consider. Nobody gets everything right all the time. Bernays asks the question, what is public opinion? Now, this ought to be good. What does Bernays think this? So here we go. Is he going to define what public opinion is, right? This fantasy phantom thing that he made up, right? Hopefully he'll define exactly what he means by public opinion. Is it the opinion of journalists, like he claimed earlier, or is it the people smushed into a monolithic stereotype? Well, he starts off claiming there are factors of the individual mind and the group mind. So claiming that there is a group mind sans evidence is not a good start. But shockingly, he drops a warning. Society must understand the fundamental character of the work he, PR, is doing, if for no other reason than his own welfare. Wow. So the public should be weary of PR for their own welfare. That is a valid warning from Bernays. Right. So why would he write that line? Who is his target audience? It's not the general public, obviously. So this is a wink to the elites. So this is not a warning to the general public. This is a flex to the elites. Look what we can do, right? PR is a powerful weapon that they can use against the public, and the public needs to understand it to defend themselves, which they obviously won't because they are the mob, the illiterati, right? On prima facie, it would appear Bernays is doing the public a solid by warning them. But this fear porn might also be meant to sell more books on PR to the literati if they happen to be reading this, right? But that is unlikely given the context and who the target audience is, as well as Bernays' apparent belief that society is a mob. If he actually believes it, why would he wouldn't believe that they would read his book, right? Bernays defines public opinion as a term describing an ill-defined mercurial, which is unpredictable mood or mind. So a term describing an ill-defined mercurial and changeable group of individual judgments. All right, so he defined, his definition defines it as ill-defined. So it's a term describing an ill-defined mercurial. Okay, so he might just mean the mood. It's mercurial and changeable group of individual judgments. So their judgments are ill-defined. And that's what he's defining as the public opinion. Maybe not his definition is ill-defined, which it is, but he's saying that their judgments are ill-defined. So he continues, public opinion is the aggregate result of individual opinions. Right, that's good. Now uniform, now conflicting, and the men and women who make up society. So there are men and women who don't make up society. Is that what he's saying? So there's men and women who make up society. Other men and women don't. So he aggregates all the individual opinions into a stereotype. At least he recognizes that he may be conflating. I would like to see him parse it into the weights or percentages of various opinions on a specific topic, but his simplistic view is that they either all agree or they don't. I don't imagine the public ever have a uniform opinion as an aggregate. Bernays foreshadows what he thinks of the people, which is not too much, but let's hear him out. He refers to the mental equipment of an average individual consisting of the judgments not based on research and logical deduction, but for the most part dogma accepted on the authority of parents, teachers, church, and his social and economic leaders. That's quite an assertion with no evidence to back it up. How does he know a sufficient percentage of people don't research or use logical deductions to make it average? He's using the word average, right? So that means you could calculate it, but he's just asserting it. Also, Bernays is apparently aware of the logical deductions, but fails to use them. Maybe he just knows the words and he doesn't understand the concept. I don't know. Bernays is using the dogmatic assertions he claims the average person does. Right? I'm not refuting his claim that the average person is an uncritical moron. They might well be. I'm just pointing out that he doesn't prove it. Also, to believe it otherwise would be subscribing to baseless dogma. I have met people who do research critically and use logic and avoid logical fallacies as best they can at all costs, but I can't definitely claim what percentage do versus what do not. Maybe we could do a study and try to, figure that out. I don't know. What Bernays does is the same technique Mao uses in his propaganda. He infuses some critical, sound, critical thinking ideas or elements and associates them. I hate using that word. He associates them. He puts them side by side with his ideology, his insanity, which is antithetical to those sound elements of logic and reason. It's like the non sequitur earlier, where they threw a couple points and then tried to pin it to their thing, right? Bernays then craps on uncritical thinkers, who claim to have all the answers on subjects they have little knowledge of. Well, let's hold up a mirror to Edward Bernays. And he says, while the rational method would have told him on the great majority of these questions, there could be for him but one attitude, that of suspended judgment. Wow. So Bernays is at least aware of the concept of suspended judgment. But one of the critical thinkers who do use suspended judgment, the fact that that concept exists proves that there are some people who must use it. No? Why else would we have invented that concept if nobody uses suspended judgment? Perhaps they are not targets because they are critical thinkers and therefore not part of the PR food chain. Bernays continues with his straw man stereotype of the average man. He claims they have settled views on many things they cannot know, such as the origin of the universe, to subjective things they can, such as the meaning of the universe. How many people do you know are certain of how the universe formed? Maybe more than I think. I don't know. It's definitely not the average in my experience. People religious or followers, dogmatic followers of science. I mean, I've talked to people who believe without doubt that the Big Bang theory is exactly what happened. No doubt in their mind at all. Well, it's a theory. They could say, yeah, we back things up, but it's a massively complex system. And there might be a lot of misinterpretations we've made of, the red shifting of things. And there might be a lot of other factors involved that we are totally unaware of. It may not have been a Big Bang, right? Just as it may not have been God created it out of a creek or whatever the religious people believe. So my experience is that, religious, all different types of people that I've talked to are not certain, although I have talked to some that are certain either way. But the same with the meaning of the universe. I don't know anyone who claims, now I don't know anybody actually who claims to know the meaning of the universe other than 42, right? Perhaps, Bernays tips his hat at the pro-centralized elitists when he disregards the opinion of the average man when it comes to how countries should be run. Legislation, taxation, the use of vaccines, the treatment of the flu, art, literature, science, and bizarrely the prevention of hydrophobia, the irrational fear of water. Now, I'm assuming he's talking about rabies. Why? Maybe rabies was a really big deal back in the day. I don't know. But this book is clearly not targeting the average person on the street when he's crapping in their face, right? So it makes sense if he's targeting his potential clients, right? But why shit on the average Joe, right? To kiss up to the sociopathic elites. That's clearly the only reason that he would be doing this, right? Or is Bernays disregarding the validity of the opinions of the common man, a dehumanization of the common soul just to soothe his conscience regarding his profession's sociopathic attacks on the common man? But Bernays explicitly told us to not rely on our conscience. So perhaps his guilt is subconscious and he's just dehumanizing the public so his target audience knows where PR stands on the issue. It's sort of, they're idiots anyway, so there's no harm in my manipulating their opinions to whatever my client thinks they should be for whatever reason, moral or not. People are capable of figuring out things if they are given valid facts and not programmed or biased by conditioning to not see it. Once people are conditioned, the veracity of their opinion is compromised, and PR is that conditioning. So Bernays should get off his high horse. He is the cause, right? Bernays appeals to the reader's anecdotes where an amateur has tried to give expert advice in matters upon which his ignorance is patent to everyone except himself, right? We've all seen this, and I'm sure we've all done this, right? So that person's ignorance is obvious to everyone, like how everyone thought the earth was flat, or how everyone thought the earth is stationary, or how everyone thought thalidomide was safe without long-term studies, right? So, and if you also think about it, if it was obvious to everyone, then he's implying everyone knows more than that person that was talking. So now all of a sudden everybody are experts. Like, which is it, right? So the fact everyone thinks something is not evidence that it is true. This is the fallacious appeal to the masses, or appeal to the mob. I'm not saying the idiot speaking out of ignorance is correct or not. I'm saying Bernays is apparently setting up the lone or few voices of dissent, which are an anathema to the manipulator class of cults and PR. He's attacking the lone voice, which he earlier was arguing for. Remember, he said, "Oh yeah, the lone voices of dissent, right? They're the heroes." And now he's saying the lone voices of dissent are the crackpots. Right? So, Bernays is appealing to the mob while attacking the mob's mentality. Right? There's zero self-awareness. And this idea of disregarding the voice of the common man because he's just an average person is not based on his argument, right? It's not based on his argument. It's based on him being just an average person. So this is a fallacy that tries to silence the lone voice of reason or innovation. So Bernays uses the witch-burning trope to crap on the mob without differentiating the mob's faulty logic with that of the average person, who is not, by definition, a witch-burning mob, right? The average person is not a witch-burning mob. Bernays writes a funny line. But people who have made no research of the subject pass strong denunciatory judgments. His implication is that anyone who passes a strong criticism has made no research. So anybody who's critical doesn't know what they're talking about. Really? So an attack on the voices of dissent. Obviously, he's talking out of his ass, as there are many people who don't research a thing and who also don't pass strong criticisms of it. Likewise, there are many who do give a sharp criticism who have done their research. But Bernays only shows the straw man of those who don't do the research and who also criticize. There are many different types, right? Keeping in mind he's not talking about any literal person or event. It's just an imaginary straw man that he fabricated, that he pulled out of his ass. So Bernays touches on the closed-minded people, intolerant of views contrary to their own. So this is called bigotry, and today it defines the typical partisan leftist, or partisan in Canada, the Liberal Party. They collapse into emotional arguments full of ad hominems and fallacies, and they are devoid of logic. Devoid of logic or void of logic? Devoid. What's the point of the D? Anyways, Bernays refers to this vitriol in politics when characters in politics allow their prejudice to supersede their logic. It rings of Justin Trudeau when he called protesters of his unconstitutional infringements on charter rights and freedoms as racists and misogynists. Actually, he called them extreme misogynists. Not just misogynists, but extreme misogynists. How dare they protest my dicta, right? My oppressing their rights and freedoms. They must be extreme misogynists, right? Bernays skirts close to rational critical thought here and makes some agreeable assertions, like intolerance is almost inevitably accompanied by a natural and true inability to comprehend or to make allowance for opposite points of view, which is true in some circumstances. However, who we should tolerate is subjective, right? People talk about tolerance. Yeah, I agree. Tolerance is a good thing, but not always. Some people should not be tolerated, right? Should we tolerate a mass murderer who enjoys killing? Should we make allowance for their point of view? Well, no, that's idiotic, right? Beyond it being patently wrong, we logically are not taking into consideration the opinions of his or her victims, right? Which, of course, bleeding heart liberals never do. Bernays makes a hypothetical example of a scientist who may be willing to entertain a promising suggestion in his own field, but may be unwilling to make an attempt to understand a contrary point of view outside of his field. So I talked earlier about how people seem to be rational about some things, but irrational about things they've been conditioned on or emotionally tied. If they fed the monster on something organically, it's likely more complex than that. But Bernays is correct when he claims even scientists can be closed-minded and dogmatic. There's a book by nuclear physicist Stanton Friedman called Science Was Wrong, which is a full example of expert scientists who were closed-minded and made wrong assertions based on no evidence, which is not the scientific method. Actually, it's worse than that. A long line of scientists, including the British astronomer Royal, with cheese, proved space travel was impossible and declared it utter bilge in 1956, less than a year before the Soviets launched Sputnik into space. This is how wrong our experts in academia can be. Apparently, if a hypothesis, or worse, evidence refutes the life work of someone, they may not have the strength of character to man up and be a real scientist. Scientists can be married to an idea, or worse, their funding may depend on it, which is the corruption of science. Bernays said some psychologists introduced the concept of logic-proof compartments. These are compartments of one's mind that even logic won't unlock, essentially just being closed-minded on that specific topic, citing a scientist who refused to see a flaw in their theory as an example. Bernays quotes a Mr. Trotter, who I'll paraphrase, Mr. Kata. Those beliefs are regarded as rational and defended as such, while the position contrary is held to be obviously unreasonable. This is something we should all be on the lookout, for in ourselves. This is why we need to hold what we want to believe in high scrutiny. Bernays claims the reason why liberals and conservatives both view each other in this light is due to herd suggestions. Now he's just talking about partisans, right? He's not talking about, but again, he's overgeneralizing. He's stereotypes, right? So, which is it's a wild assertion with no evidence, and it leaves us to define what herd suggestions might mean. There's obviously some mimicry and power of suggestion that does have some effect, but herd suggestion, right? The entire argument by Bernays is based on the premise that the average people cannot reason or detect logical fallacies. In fact, he wrote, "The differences are not due to the mere mechanical fallacies of logic, since those are easily avoided even by the politician." If logical fallacies are so easily avoided, how come they are everywhere in the news and politics and even in Bernays' own writing? It's so easy to... So a priori, right, can mean assumed cause to related effect, right? A causation correlation fallacy without recognizing it as a fallacy, right? Or it can mean reasoning without reference to experience. So theoretical conclusions from pure logic like math and deductive reasoning. So a priori can mean a couple different things, right? Whereas a posteriori is knowledge based on observations, empirical evidence, like the inductive logic of statistics, as well as the abductive logic of best guess and the logical fallacies of stereotype. Just because something is observed doesn't mean it's true, right? Depending on how you interpret that, right? So a priori and a posteriori by themselves do not imply truth or falsity. Bernays claims PR has to consider the a priori judgment, which is generally logic-based, of any public before counseling anything that would modify their established belief. I'm not sure if Bernays is implying the a priori judgment of the public is a false judgment. I hope not. He writes, "It is seldom effective to call names or to attempt to discredit the beliefs themselves." Right? But this is we know today that a ad hominem, the logical fallacy of ad hominem, is effective. So it is effective to call names, right? But maybe not if you want to win them over, and that's his point. He wants to manipulate them. But if you call the advocates of a certain point names, then those listening might be won over to your point. So now he's talking about specifically the targets. So there's no benefit to calling the targets names. There's only benefits to calling those who are advocating the points that they don't want the targets to believe names, right? So which depends on the context, because ad hominem apparently does weaken the prestige of the victim, right? Or worse than it does that of the attacker. So he's right in arguing that a closed-minded person's beliefs is seldom, attacking their beliefs is arguing against them is seldom effective. I've argued with a lot of religious people, different religions and stuff, and it doesn't matter what logic you use, it is seldom, I don't think ever, I wouldn't say ever, but rarely effective depending on how conditioned the person is, right? Though we absolutely should try to discredit certain beliefs, if they're not found on anything, right? You can argue the point. Now, people they're free to choose to believe whatever they want, and I fully support that. If these beliefs survive our attacks by valid reason and logic, they should be that much stronger. Now, there's different ways of interpreting this, right? When you don't want, there's a holistic perspective of things, right? But I don't want to go off on a tangent here. But so his point appears to be that the public is closed-minded and it's pointless to try to reason with illiterate beasts. It sounds like he's teeing up justification for manipulation because reason doesn't work, so we might as well just manipulate them, right? So despite not all the public being closed-minded, but Bernays does love his stereotype. So in context, Bernays is telling us, is trying to tell us how to manipulate the opinions of the public. So perhaps he's just saying, discrediting the beliefs and ad hominems don't win the schmucks over. You need a more calculated method. So he's trying to, again, write to his audience that you guys can't just do this by attacking them. You need us, the specialists in PR, to win the schmucks over, right? So he writes, after examining the sources of established beliefs, PR must either discredit the old authorities, so those claiming those, or create a new one by making articulate a mass opinion against the old belief in favor of the new. So that is a list of how a mode of how PR tries to manipulate people. They examine the sources of the established beliefs, whether they're true or not, it doesn't matter. And so in order to change people's beliefs away from potentially a true opinion, the PR must either discredit the old authorities by ad homining them or whatever, or create a new one, just fabricate it, create it, and make articulate a mass opinion. So now we need to appeal to the masses. This is what everybody believes. Everybody believes. I'm talking Italian. Everybody believes it, right? So mass opinion. So they're appealing to mob or the masses, right? Mass opinion against the old belief in favor of the new one. So if people believe something that's true, you need to attack the authority that validates that. You need to create a new authority that contradicts it. And you need to articulate how everybody, the mass opinion. Now, I really am curious about what his definition of mass opinion is. But, we can interpret it naturally to be just the opinion of a mob, right, against the old true belief in favor of the new false one. So by a priori, he means the source of the public's belief, which is a wrong use of a priori, as the public's opinion could be from observation a posteriori as well, right? So to change the public's belief, PR must discredit the old authority or articulate a mass opinion against the old for the new. So it's or, it's not an and. I would assume they would probably try to do both. So what are the old authorities? Individuals, books, modes of thought, an ideology, a religion? Clearly if one's opinion is based on scientific evidence and reason, valid scientific, I mean the actual meaning of the word scientific, so based on scientific evidence and reason, and PR wants to change that opinion to the whim of their client, the scientific establishment must be discredited or conscripted to regurgitate the new narrative, or a straw man that doesn't really represent the scientific community needs to be created to claim to be the authority, to claim to be the scientific community, usurping the trust the generations of hard-won science earned. The heart of hard-won science? That's a mouthful. So they need to, straw man science. So this is a 2-4, right? So they're actually weakening science, which is the search for truth, and use that to promote falsities. So the fact the scientific community doesn't speak up loud enough against this doesn't bode well for the reputation of science. Now, this could be due to regulatory capture, or it could be to the academia that these people went through that was corrupted. It's a whole thick shit sandwich, right? We need to be hearing these people speak up. Now, I'm not saying there aren't people that speak up. There are people that do speak up that, support science. But they appear to be the minority. Now, they may not be, but they are projected to be as the conspiracy theorists, right? Even though a lot of them have the patents and, the published the most peer-reviewed papers on the subject, as in McCullough and those other guys, right? So, and people are trying to discredit them. Right, so that's exactly what Bernays is saying here. You need to discredit the authority. Who are these people? We need to discredit them. Call them names, right? So people don't believe what they're saying, assuming that the crowd is too stupid to listen and use their own judgment. And now this might be the 80-20 rule. There might be 80% of the population that is stupid enough to not think critically, right? And this is what we're fighting, right? So Bernays is calling for the use of the fallacious appeal to the mob to change the public's beliefs. Now, they're pretty simple tools they're using, but they seem to have great effect, right? And it's really, anyways. Since Bernays recognized logical fallacies exist and even claimed they are easy to avoid by even an idiot politician, right? The fact that he's now using them a couple paragraphs later would indicate he is either experiencing his logic proof compartment or the closed-minded fool, or he's intentionally using deception and fallacy for effect. If he's using it for deception, does he believe his target audience is this stupid? I wouldn't be surprised. Either way, it's not good for Bernays. He's either a fool or evil. Evidence is pushing the scales towards sociopath. So he moves on to the public opinion being stubborn or malleable. Given Bernays' profession, it's obvious that he would argue I would assume the public's opinion is malleable, regardless of whatever the truth is, right? Otherwise, his industry is pointless. So he briefly touches on nature-nurture writing. There is a profound belief that you can't change human nature, versus equally firm assurance that certain well-defined institutions modify and alter public opinion. So what's the difference between modify and alter? Well, modify means to make minor changes, typically to improve or to make less extreme, and alter is to change the character or composition, typically in a small but significant way. So I guess like the end of a movie, a minor modification may slightly improve or make less extreme, whereas an altered ending, while also small, can significantly change the character and the meaning of the movie. So you modified your course to make it more accurate, but you alter your course slightly to have a different destination. I never really distinguished between modify and alter before. Bernays claims there is uniformity of opinion in the country upon many issues. He doesn't give any evidence or proof of this assertion, but okay. He claims that when we agree with this uniformity, we call it an expression of the public conscience. So Bernays tells us that we, the radical fringe, call the public, the so-called public opinion, the regimentation of the public mind, and are inclined to ascribe to it insidious propaganda, right? So those of us who don't agree with the majority of the public opinion, according to him, well, I'm not saying a majority, he just says the public opinion, so we're assuming he means the majority, right? We call it insidious propaganda, right? If I don't agree, it's obviously insidious propaganda. So that's trying to make the claim that insidious propaganda doesn't exist, right? It does exist. This is a guy trying to promote fucking insidious propaganda. So what's important here is that Bernays is not claiming the radical is wrong in their observations or opinions, right? He's just saying that they call it insidious propaganda. So they might be right in noticing the insidious propaganda. So he goes on to claim uniformity of opinion is only partially artificial and writes, public opinion may be as much the producer of insidious propaganda as its product. Right. So recall that propaganda is the intentional propagation of a doctrine or narrative with the intent to change the target's beliefs, opinions, or actions. Public opinion does not do that. There's a difference between propaganda and public opinion, right? One is the result, perhaps. When someone like Bernays, that is someone who is advocating for manipulation of the public as an industry, plays loosey-goosey with definitions, especially with a word like propaganda, a concept that constitutes the spine of his profession, we can be fairly certain that he is doing so intentionally to deceive. If PR implants an opinion via insidious propaganda, the public feedbacks on that and apparently creates its own insidious propaganda based off of that, according to Bernays, right? And the only group conscious of the manipulation are the PR and their clients, who are morally responsible for the insidious propaganda. Bernays is calling the public opinion feedback to the insidious propaganda as natural. Then what we are to assume is the artificial part. It would appear to be the influence of PR. So let's take a closer look at what Bernays, his word choice, right? So what is the definition of insidious? Insidious is proceeding in a gradual, subtle way, but with harmful effects. So proceeding in a gradual, subtle way with harmful effects. That's insidious. This is the word Bernays chooses to describe PR. Insidious is a synonym to treacherous. So he could be, being sarcastic here, right? But treachery is the betrayal of trust, deceptive action or nature. Betrayal of trust, a deceptive action or nature. So a deceptive nature. Insidious propaganda is Bernays' term. So he knows full well what it is. To be fair, right, he could be, like I said, he could be sarcastic. As a derogatory term, he's heard other people, use to describe his industry. But that still doesn't help his cause, does it? If this is the interpretation of other people, they see it for what it is. Instead of his definition of the industry, it's a common definition. Yeah, it's a common definition of the industry. So it may not be his definition, but it is a definition, right? We're not sure exactly, but regardless, it is a definition of the industry. Then Bernays goes on after that, thorny radical fringe who are frustratingly resilient to his manipulation techniques, and he calls them out of sympathy with the accepted point of view. So they're out of sympathy with the accepted point of view. So accepted is a fallacious appeal. It needs to be accepted because of specific cited cognitive or cogent evidence. So he's just saying it's accepted. Accepted by who? Accepted by him and his client, right? It was also accepted the earth was flat. It was accepted that elites didn't go to Epstein's pedophile island and molest young girls. It was accepted that the government didn't experiment on Americans with LSD for behavior modification. When one hears the accepted opinion, a red flag should go up, especially in the sciences, because their job is to know better and be critical thinkers. But apparently today they rarely do. So notice too, the slight pivot from uniform point of view to accepted point of view, or accepted opinion. So a uniform point of view has been pivoted to an accepted opinion. So his implicit claim is that because it is uniform, it is the accepted view. No mention of veracity or truthfulness. According to Bernays, these resilient independent schmucks also find the public unreceptive to their point of view, which is who they are to Bernays, the public who are unreceptive to PR's point of view. Bernays says these independent schmucks, justly or unjustly, they attribute this unreceptiveness to the influence of antagonistic interests upon the public mind. Damn straight. If Bernays were around today, he would refer to this resilient class as conspiracy theorists who think there is an industry which is manipulating the public opinion in a book about that very thing. Right? If I were to psychoanalyze Edward Bernays, I might say he feels these resilient schmucks who are unresponsive to the accepted opinion are the antagonistic interests upon the public mind. It feels as if he's projecting. I would be proud to consider myself among those independent schmucks who are not in line with the uniform opinion, dictated by PR scum or mechanisms unknown, if their opinion is based on questioning and best effort attempt at critical reasoning. Critical thinking is a voyage. It is not a destination. Cliche, right? But it's true. How does he know what freethinkers are thinking? He doesn't make it explicit, most likely because it's a bullshit straw man. But according to Bernays, these resilient radicals think the press, lectures, schools, ads, churches, radios, movies, magazines, as the sources actually influencing the public opinion. Well, that's what they think. That's what he's trying to claim they are, right? Bernays writes that those radical freethinkers, those who think institutions influence the public opinion because there is agreement amongst those institutions. So he's saying if these public institutions all agree, then they must be in league. He writes, they don't stop to think that agreement in point of view between the public and these institutions may often be a result of the control exercised by the public mind over these institutions. So it's the public who are influencing these institutions to all think alike, right? Clearly a red herring. Bernays claims to control the public mind via these institutions, and when dissidents recognize the uniformity of narrative, he claims the public may be the ones influencing those institutions. What a worm, right? The hairnet company's manipulation campaign for women to grow their hair was actually influenced by the public opinion and not the company funding the conspiracy to manipulate those unsuspecting women. Just as it was really the public opinion to sell more bacon and not some fabricated medical truth by a meat packer. So a couple paragraphs later, what does Bernays claim? That outside forces do influence public opinion, the most obvious being the press, lectures, schools, ad, churches, radio, movies, and magazines, and parents. So way to agree with the people you're targeting, Eddie. Right? He's saying they're wrong, and then, this is what they think, and then this is what I agree with them, right? He didn't say he agrees with them. Anyways. So can the public opinion control institutions? Well, first one needs to prove that there is even a public opinion. If we define public opinion as the stereotype an individual has for the majority of what people think, then no, public opinion can't influence those institutions in a substantial way, as that definition of public opinion is unique to each person, and it is only their personal stereotype that has any influence if they are in a position to affect an institution. And no one has reached to affect change across them all. So unless they are stupid rich and crazy, it's their perception of reality, not reality itself. So the public's actual opinion has very minimal effect. Bernays writes, how stubborn the people can be to the influence of the press. The press, according to Bernays, are designated as leaders or molders of the public mind. So here he's clearly defining the press to not be the people, the original definition of what the press were. He's defining them as leaders or molders of the public mind. So here he's claiming clearly that the press are not the people. They are some centralized elite that mold the public mind. So how much influence would the public have on the designated leader or molders of the public mind? Clearly, those resilient schmucks were not wrong when they claimed these institutions manipulate the public's opinion now, were they? Right? So here I am getting duped into admitting there is public opinion. You see how that works? So again, he writes, it's not surprising that the man who is outside of the current of prevailing public opinion should regard the press as a coercive force. Well, why wouldn't they? You just finished explaining the press is a coercive force. Idiot, right? The more alarming point, and the one that Bernays is oddly ignoring, is that those who are coerced don't recognize their coercion by the press. Coercion. So that's the anomaly. Not the people who see through the bullshit, but those who are duped by it. Today, it's orders of magnitude worse with social media platforms such as Facebook and others who study the addictive psychological nature of the platform and how to get more people hooked for longer. So during the last U.S. election, there was a true story by all accounts about Hunter Biden's laptop. And that story was printed in a New York paper that was started by Alexander Hamilton in 1801. What is horrifying is the conclusion of the collective conclusion of all of big tech, social media, Google, right, news organizations, and the Democratic Party, surprisingly enough, to bury the story until after the election. So this clearly demonstrates centralized control of apparently separate entities, but they are just, tentacles of the same evil creature. Even in Canada, the loser fake media jumped on board. The bias is blatant and disgusting. It's so blatant. Pure lies and deception. Treachery, betrayal of the public's trust. So Bernays gives some examples about how, despite many or most news media being against certain politicians, they still won majorities. Now, this rattles the cage of these centralized control freaks, right? Though Bernays claims these instances are not frequent. So recall how Bernays wrote the stubborn, free-thinking schmuck would attribute the public's ignoring of his point of view to the regimentation of the public mind, implying the schmuck was looking for excuses. Now, Bernays questions, how would such authors as Martin, Lippmann, and Sinclair explain the stubborn resilience of those instances? How, on the theory of regimentation of the public mind by the press, can thinkers explain the sharpness with which the public sometimes rejects the advocacies of a united press? Again, Bernays claims it is infrequent that the sheeple reject the forces of a united press, but goes on to say that these examples show there must be other influences beside the press which enter into the making of a public opinion, and that these forces must never be disregarded in the estimate of the quality and stability of a prevalent public opinion. Look at the arrogance of Bernays to question how the press does not have complete and absolute control over the entire population's opinion. Clearly, he is indicating that PR want to control the quality and stability of any narrative. Interesting to see the press was united in narrative 100 years ago. What these other influences, in quotes, other influences are that affect the public perception of a narrative such that they disregard their masters in the press, Bernays does not say. But he's warning the elites that there are other influences. Is it word of mouth? Who knows, right? Is it logic? Is it reason? They don't know. They're short-circuiting. How could these people not believe what we tell them to, right? But I would venture to guess it is a dose of rational thought by a public that isn't as stupid and sheep-like as the manipulators want to believe. Now recall, these people do use stereotype, and they are not critical thinkers. I'm talking about the manipulators. So obviously their nodes of thought are going to lead to erroneous conclusions. Bernays doesn't see the cognitive flaws of his overgeneralizations because he embraces it, right? He writes accounts of people questioning the power that the press wield among us. Clearly, that power is the power to manipulate. But I do like the quote Bernays includes from a guy called Henry Louis Mencken. This guy, every time I've come across him, I agree. I love this guy's quotes. I got to read more about him. But one of the principal marks, so this is what H.L. Mencken says, one of the principal marks of an educated man is that he does not take his opinion from newspapers. On the contrary, his attitude toward them is almost always one of frank cynicism. He knows they are constantly falling into false reasoning about the things within his personal knowledge, so he assumes they make the same errors about other things. This assumption is quite justified by the facts. So this, I don't really know much about this Henry Mencken guy, but I like what little I've seen. It appears Bernays was trying to expose Mencken as one of those free-thinking, radical schmucks. But in effect, all he did was weaken his own position of the news being the power that controls the people's minds. So Bernays writes a second point of view, that the press and other leading forces merely accept, reflect, and intensify established public opinion and are therefore responsible for the uniformity of public reaction. Right? So let's make this assertion. Bullshit, right? Bernays is trying to mitigate the responsibility of the press and other leading forces of manipulation as only being responsible for the uniformity of public reaction. Right? He's claiming the press and other forces of manipulation only. Well, he doesn't say only, does he? He says they accept, intensify, and reflect. The intensification is the manipulative part. If one intensifies, that implies they choose which parts to amplify. As we all know, amplification is a cognitive error. It is perhaps on the apophenia scale. If one sees a pattern or connection that isn't there, type 1 false positive, that error may be due to the amplification of some points, which would logically lead to a false conclusion if it was not amplified. Conversely, if one is amplifying a portion, that means they are attenuating or negatively amplifying other points relative to the ones that are being positively amplified. So as a whole message, those parts are now muted and may not indicate connections that should be made, if they were at the proper intensity, making that part of the signal or message a type 2 or a false negative. Any way you look at it, it's distortion and manipulation of the original signal, message, or opinion. If the press is responsible for the public's reaction, and the reaction of someone cannot be manipulated without first messing with their opinions or emotions, you can mess with someone's emotions without messing, or can you mess with someone's emotions without messing with their opinions? What are the vectors of control over someone's emotions? Appeals to emotions, appeals to something against their core values or sense of what is correct or what ought to be. I can't see how one can be responsible for manipulating someone else's reaction without also manipulating their opinion. The point's really moot. As Bernays later claims that PR creates the news, and the news is the weapon to control the public's opinion. So all this crap he's trying to sell right now is just bullshit, or perhaps dog whistles of how to go about messing with an opinion while simultaneously trying to shirk the responsibility, and worse, put the responsibility on the shoulders of those targets. It's very slimy. Bernays is, a subhuman. So the forces of manipulation only accept, amplify, and reflect the established public opinion. Established by what mechanisms? How does Bernays define established public opinion? It appears it is the opinion established by PR's client, if we're to use his early examples of hairnets and bacon. It's clear here that he was crapping on the interesting fellow, Henry L. Mencken, because Bernays writes, "There's a third group which perhaps comes closer to the truth." So his first concept is Mencken calling journalists what they are, liars, and not a valid source of information. His second bit is the press merely reflecting back to the public their own opinion. And now this third take, where the press are merely benevolent mediums of education and disinformation. Right? So more like mediums of insemination as the public are mind raped. Right? My take is that the power over opinions, like all other powers, can be used malevolently or benevolently. Right? Even the press might give a benevolent story here and there amongst the whips and chains of their slave driver Norm. Also, the common thread in all three of Bernays' scenarios, what's the plural, right, is the manipulation of the public mind. He also touches on advertisers' potential power over publications. If an advertiser does not like a story being covered, they could warn the publication that their funding will be pulled. I suppose that's why we never see an outlet funded by Big Pharma ever doing a story about regulatory capture. Unless perhaps they claim it's a conspiracy theory, of course. Other barriers to manipulation are trying to get the attention of the quality public or targets. Their attention is required in order to manipulate their emotion. Like I wrote on my website a couple of years ago now, I guess, your attention is their resource, your emotion is their product. I was thinking more about social media when I came up with that, but it fits perfectly with manipulation. Is that a coincidence? Some claim there is no such thing as coincidence. Essentially, Bernays is saying clickbait, which interests the target personally, is required. Not a story on a strike or the plight of our fellow man. More, how will that strike affect the reader? The manipulator's goal is to arouse personal interest from the target. He's essentially claiming the facts are boring and unemotional, therefore papers need to write in a way that we can perceive them and translate them immediately into parallel facts. What the fuck is a parallel fact? Feels like he's arguing that articles, or headlines at least, need to evoke immediate phantom connections, the false positive apophenia. Yes, parallel concepts are things that are compared to show likeness or closely corresponding, so he may not be arguing for phantom connections, as opposed to Alfred Hitchcock's contrapuntal counterpoints, I suppose. Bernays concludes with the possibility of a malleable public opinion. PR simply can utilize existing channels. Again, stressing the importance of PR's study of the organs that maintain public opinion or that influence it to change. Notice he doesn't say that change public opinion, but instead he says that influence it to change. Insidious, proceeding in a gradual, subtle way, but with harmful effects.